Hello, and welcome to the first in our series discussing Destiny's different species and their associated history. For this episode, we'll be focusing on the Cabal, specifically their time leading up to their interactions with us Guardians here in the Sol System. We won't be discussing the Red War today, and touching very little on in-game events. Instead, the purpose of this video is to provide historical context for our former enemies, with whom we now hold a fragile alliance. My hope is to provide some of the more important milestones in their development, but also to highlight a few lesser-known stories as well. With that being said, let's take a little time to explore the history of the Cabal. Pre-Acrius, Era of Lead. We don't get much about this earliest known era of the Cabal, with exception to the seasonal artifact, the Bell of Conquest. These trophies arose from a much grislier practice, where they would literally facet pieces of their fallen opponent to their gear. Instead, warriors were granted their own bell after proving themselves in combat. Symbols representing accomplishments would then be cast into the sides of the bell, and striking the bell of arrival was to issue a challenge. Once the symbol of a defeated opponent had been worn into your bell, you would also inherit any social bearings that came with their station. Emperor Acrius, Age of Sails, or Era of Conquest. We mainly learn of this era from the words of Caiatl, though we do get a few second-hand accounts and boisterous claims here or there. While the story itself is important, I also think it's important to discuss the context in which Bungie decided to reveal the true depth of the fable. Originally, in the aptly named Legend of Acrius Shotgun, Cryptarch Tyra Karn tells us a very succinct version of the story. Cabal saw sun, Cabal conquered sun, Cabal was leader of Cabal. In fact, the entire legend takes place in 24 short words in the weapon's description alone, the actual lore card portion of the weapon being a much longer look into the Cryptarch's musings. Tyra finds herself pondering what kind of historical effects could have led to such a brutally short storytelling, and the influence it may have had on the leaders in their culture. On the flip side, we have Caiatl's version of the story. Juxtaposed to a scholar from a different culture giving an assessment of a mythology, we get to see a leader share an intimate story with one of her people. She greets a wounded soldier in an infirmary, having been discharged from duty and suffering from a perceived failure in purpose. In a show of empathy, from empress to soldier, sitting with them, Caiatl offers a much more detailed version of the legend of Acrius, First Emperor. In the times before the first Cabal Emperor, 3 warriors set their sights on the sun and desired to conquer it. The sun was protected by a great beast. The first warrior attempted to sneak in the shadows, but was easily discovered and devoured. The second warrior attempted to circumvent the great beast, but the winds of fate shifted, and the warrior was also devoured. The third warrior instead chose to face the beast head-on, fighting bravely, scoring blow after blow with her blades, till ultimately, she too was defeated. Many warriors came after, till finally, a warrior named Acrius landed the final blow, and claimed the sun for the Cabal. Caiatl assures the soldier that while indeed the first 2 warriors may have failed for thinking that battle could be avoided, the third warrior succeeded in leaving her mark on her foe. And while Acrius may have been a hero for being the one to land the final blow, so too was the warrior who landed the first, as well as all others that contributed to its defeat. Caiatl succeeds in assuaging the wounded veteran's despondency, but she goes even further. When the soldier thanks the Empress for her time, Caiatl turns it around and instead thanks the soldier for their efforts, telling them it is the Empire that thanks you. The Praetoriate, a group of the leaders from their respective legions that, by description, were meant to be a measure of balance and counsel for the Empress. In reality, however, this group had managed to steal away more and more influence as the Empress continued to age and grow more decrepit. As the Empress grew so old that she was slowly transforming to a living fossil, quite literally, the Praetoriate locked the Empress in a ship we can only assume was the Leviathan. Accelerating the ship to near light speed, they were able to use relativity to keep the Empress alive and prevent a succession of emperors from taking place and threatening the Praetoriate's power. We only know of this story as a retelling from Keitel's memory of her father, Callus, telling her the story. While we have no other evidence to contradict this story, it's important to always take single-source stories with a grain of salt, and even more so with someone responsible for commissioning the Chronicon. Emperor Callus. Callus viewed the Praetoriate as a self-serving parasite on the Cabal people. He massacred a majority of the leading politicians and publicly dishonored the rest. Taking the leader of the Praetoriate, the consul, he banished him to a wasteland of Callus's own making. He was all-encompassing in his removal of the Praetoriate's influence, turning ceremonies and practices to such a farce that the people chose to abandon them. Not everyone was content with Callus's new empire, however, mostly the remaining few who were left from the old ways. As a discontentment festered in his ranks, Callus became more and more engrossed in the comforts and excess of his empire. In an uprising known as the Midnight Coup, Callus was banished to the ship the Leviathan. Much as his story of the Empress before him, he was launched in his spacefaring prison to never obstruct the Praetoriate again. However, at some point during Callus's isolation, the ship came across the Witness, telling the Cabal Emperor of the coming end to the suffering of the universe. Callus became a fanatic for the darkness. As only Callus could, he transitioned from his depression and isolation to a philosophy closer to nihilistic indulgence. Dominus Gall. Born as a runt and cast out as an orphan from a society that valued worth as a soldier above all else. Found by the banished consul, he was trained in the art of martial combat and political warfare. As Gall grew older, he became a star competitor in the Colosseum fights, earning favor with Emperor Callus. Promoted through the ranks, Callus made the once ostracized runt his ghost Primus, head of the Red Legion. Having finally made it to the right hand of the Emperor, Gall set about enacting the consul's plan. Gathering those sympathetic to the cause, Gall led an uprising against Callus, known as the Midnight Coup, along with Callus's own daughter, Keitel. Leading the banner of a return to military doctrine and Cabal dominance, Gall did away with the gluttony of Callus's reign and declared an end to all emperors. System after system fell under the weight of the Red Legion's heel at the command of Dominus Gall. Unfortunately, Gall was plagued by an underlying need to prove himself and to be considered worthy. When he heard of a power in the Sol system that managed to resist both Cabal and Hive, Gall became obsessed with obtaining this power for himself. As he had only been accepted back into Cabal society through brutal competition, he would again seek approval from the Traveler through conquest. Unfortunately, after failing in all attempts to gain favor from the Silent Horde, Gall resorted to taking it forcibly, pouring the light into himself. In a rare show of activity, the traveler finally intervenes and strikes down the almighty Gaul. Empress Keitel. The daughter of the deposed Emperor Callus, Keitel has spent her life decidedly going against her father's opulence. A top-ranked fighter pilot and tactician in her own right, she spent her time committed to her studies and training. With the majority of the Cabal strength heading to the Sol system, Keitel is left to be the face of leadership for her people. When Gaul is defeated by the Guardians, however, she assumes the full role of Empress. While still coming to terms with her new duties and strengthening the morale of her people, Keitel's lifelong friend and High General, Amun Arath, succumbs to Hive corruption, enacting a ritual that brings the Hive God of War, Xivu Arath, to the homeworld of Tora Battle. The Cabal defend their planet fiercely, but they are no match for the seemingly endless horde. In her victory, Xivu Arath takes title of all Cabal history as a celebration of her war, claiming the Cabal as her unwilling own. Hiding the lines of appeasing her more traditional war advisors and accepting the new reality the Empire finds itself in, she uses her upbringing as both a soldier and as an emperor's daughter to establish herself as an empathetic leader. Convincing her people to leave Tora Battle and seek assistance from the Sol system is no small feat. After all, the Cabal have never known defeat in this way, to the point they have no word for the idea of retreat. From our perspective, telling the Guardians to submit instead of asking for assistance was a little more than insulting. However, from the context of Cabal society and traditions, it was a brilliant move, and probably the only one Keitel could have made. Her more hardline supporters would have seen anything less as further weakness, diverting even more resources to the Red Legion supporters and Shadow Legion. This about wraps up our introduction to the history of the Cabal. There are many more tales from their history to dive into. The induction of the Scions, the formation of Callus's shadows, the details of the Midnight Coup, etc. Their relation to our own real-world Roman folklore is undeniable, but I think they have their own fantastical flavor. For most of our interactions, they are a singularly minded, warmongering people, but in recent years, we've come to learn so much more about their culture. Thanks for hanging out for a brief history of the Cabal. I hope this gave you some context for our newest, tenuous allies, and maybe inspires you to look into some stories you found interesting. Have a good one.